right, hello and welcome back to another episode where we're going to dive into mass persuasion today, right? And again, this is part of our series on creating mass movements, right? Part of mass movements is persuading the masses. And so this is really the stuff I'm going to cover today is so applicable for so many things in life. But specifically today, we're going to talk about how people will use these things to manipulate the masses. And so this can be applied to marketers, right? People trying to sell you stuff. This is what they'll do. They will fall like good people, good salesmen, and good people that are, of persuasion, trying to persuade you to do something. They will use these components that I'm going to talk about in this training. And again, we want to be clear too that, look, persuasion is not good or bad. I can be persuaded to buy something that actually really is helpful for me, right? And so these tools are just that. They're just tools. They're just ways of doing things. Now, we need to understand that they can be used for good and bad, okay? I am not implying that mass movements are bad. They aren't, right? They can be, right? They definitely can be, but they can also be good. I'm not implying persuasion's bad. I persuade people, I try to persuade people all the time. In fact, this video right now, right, is an act of persuasion, right? To trying to persuade the idea of thinking critically about stuff as opposed to getting roped into mass movements, right? I mean, it just like, you see that kind of the meta level of this. But most of us are operating from a place of persuasion, quite often in our life. And it's just about understanding what's going on so you can see it and not get so emotionally attached to it and so close to it that you are getting persuaded to do something that ultimately you don't want to be doing, right? So let's talk about the 5 components of persuasion. And this is something that I picked up from the one-sentence persuasion course by Blair Warren. And so again, we talked about a mass movement. One of the first components of a mass movement is a charismatic leader, right? So someone who, you're following, right? And usually that person is positioning himself in a way where they are where you want to be, right? Or they're going to lead you where you want to be. And some of the things that they're going to do to persuade you to follow them are to encourage your dreams, to justify your failures, to put your fears to rest, or allay your fears, confirm your suspicions, and throw rocks at the enemy. So let's talk about each one of these. So encouraging your dreams. This is when the person's going to look and kind of future pace you, right? And say, hey, look, wouldn't it be great if you were here, right? And kind of really get into, the deep emotional place in your mind of where you want to be in your life, right? So this idea of like, okay, if you're dreaming about this, right, of, let's just say having a 6-figure job or, something like that, right? It doesn't really matter what it is. They're going to, again, encourage that dream. Yeah, you know what? You deserve that, right? And again, this can be used for good or bad, right? We need to understand that general concept that people will use this for evil. The evil people, when they get this concept, will use it for bad stuff. Good people will use it for good stuff. But encouraging dreams, again, can be used for good or bad. But this is what one of the things they'll do. The second thing is that they'll justify failures. So one of the last things that any of us ever want to admit is failure, right? And a good persuader will take your failures and explain how they're not about you, right? So they'll be like, yeah, you know what? It's this person's fault, right? It's the government's fault that this is or it's this particular political party it's their fault, right? And they will take any guilt that you feel about your failure and remove it from you, right? Because the last thing that most people want to do is admit that, hey, I fell short, I failed, right? And it's a tough thing for people to do. And again, obviously it's the almost the opposite of my message in many ways, where it's like, I believe in taking personal responsibility. I think it's one of the most important things we can do, right? But when you talk about mass movements manipulating, if they can make you not the failure, not the reason for the hardship that you're experiencing, whatever that might be, well, then naturally you're gonna gravitate towards that, because your ego doesn't ever want to be wrong, be a failure, or be in the wrong end of things, right? So the third thing is to put to rest your fears, right? So that's number 3. Now, well, what does that mean? Well, we all have fear, right? And when we're driven by fear of the future, naturally it's going to create chaos in our present moment, right? And when a good persuader, what they'll do is they'll kind of future pace you and give you a future of hope, right? In your mind anyway. And that puts you to rest in the present, right? We always have the present moment. Good persuaders will almost try to predict or like help you predict your future in a positive way, so they can essentially put your fears to rest about the future, right? And again, for better or worse, right? If we look at the example I used in the last episode when I talked about the charismatic leader and persuasion, it's like, okay, you have Jesus on one hand, right? And the idea of like, look, you don't need to worry about going, or like God sending you to hell, as long as you believe in me, right, or believe in Jesus, then, and ultimately accept the forgiveness, that is what is going to enable you to ultimately get to heaven. And so that fear is put to rest. Now, conversely, on the other side with Hitler, right, in his mass movement, well, you know what? You can actually use fear of like, hey, if we don't do this, then this and this and this and this is going to happen, right? And so, in order to make sure that this bad stuff doesn't happen, right? So you can future pace a good event, or you can future pace a bad event. And I want you to see that, if someone is future pacing bad stuff in your future, that's going to create fear, right? And then they put that fear to rest by saying, hey, here's the solution, right? It's a very, very interesting persuasion technique to pay attention to, because if someone's talking about this futuristic catastrophe, right, of these bad things, that's creating fear in you. That's all. That's what there's nothing that drives more behavior than fear, right? And I again specialize in OCD and anxiety, and so you watch how much fear controls people. It's like when you can create fear in someone and then put that fear to rest with your solution. It's almost, in many ways, it's not like it's guaranteed they're going to do it, but it's a high probability, right, that they're going to be listening to you. Number 4 is to confirm their suspicions, right? And again, instead of challenging suspicions, right, it's the idea of confirming the suspicions. See, and like, because nothing makes someone feel more aligned than when you take something that's kind of going on in their mind and you can speak it to them before they even say it, right? So when they're like, oh, this, right? You can fill in the blank on this, but something that they're suspicious about, like, oh, I wonder if this, and then that the leader says that to you, it's like, oh, see, I knew it, and when they're able to say what you're thinking before you ever say it, there's an immediate alignment that confirms there, right, or that forms there. And then finally is to throw rocks at the enemies. And so any good persuader, what they'll do when we're talking about mass persuasion especially, is they will create an us versus them mentality, right? They will create a divide on purpose, right? Because if you're trying to get a movement created, again, you have to be moving against something. And even if you have to create that something, that's the only way you can create a movement, right? So creating division is a huge component of persuasion. So, if, just thinking of an example off the top of my head, it's like, okay, some people will, like in mental health, let's say, right? There's different modalities of therapy. And anyone that's persuading someone to work with them, right? Like if I was a therapist and I, obviously I believe in the research and evidence-based of practice of ERP and CBT when it comes to treating anxiety, right? And things like acceptance, commitment therapy, mindfulness, all that. If someone comes to me and they say, well, I want to try electroshock therapy, right? Or, something like that. Some very or, I want to get lobotomized or something. And I just say, yeah, all treatments are created equal, right? Everything's great. Just do whatever you want. In order to persuade someone to do the work, I have to kind of show hey, man, this is why this is bad and this is why this treatment's good, right? And I have to make that persuasion. In the same way, though, when it comes to creating a mass movement politically or, into a kind of a creating a culture, all that stuff, you have to create an us versus them to create something to move against, okay? And in many ways, right, the media, right, if we look at what the media is doing, right, in the States, talk about fueling fear on both ends, right? I'm just fear. Go read the headlines today. I avoid news like the plague, right? I don't engage with it, don't consume it, because at the end of the day, it's and it's going to be biased no matter who writes it, and it's going to be fear driven because fear drives behavior. Right. And then if they can stimulate the fear, what they can then do is position their solution as the result that you need to follow. So someone putting you in a fearful state, you need to understand that is manipulation. That is persuasion. Right. Because if you're in a fearful state, you're not going to be thinking logically. Right. And so again, just to recap these as we go in. So again, encouraging dreams. Right. So encouraging that positive stuff. Right. Justifying failures. Making it not you. It's like you're not the issue, right? There's no way that you could be at fault here, right? So and then setting up, usually that's where they set up the us versus them approach. And then putting fears to rest. Often that includes stimulating fears first and then putting them to rest, right? And confirming suspicions and throwing rocks at the enemy, right? Or so, creating an us versus them environment. And so understanding these 5 components is crucial to understanding persuasion, because this is what people that are really good at persuasion will do. This is what con men will do, right? And sociopaths who are going to manipulate you financially, right? They're going to create all this stuff to ultimately get an end result. And on conversely, people that are really trying to help you will do these same things. And it's your job as an individual to step back from the emotion that's created through these and to ask yourself from critically thinking for yourself of okay, what's going on? What am I trying to be persuaded into? And really asking yourself, is this for my best interest or is it for theirs, right? Am I being used right now, right? Because persuasion in the right hands can be a very good thing. That's part of what has to happen, right? Is that we have to, in the medical professional, you often there's a persuasion that's needed to get someone to take treatment, right? Or to get help, right? When they need it. And that is a good thing. Persuasion is not bad in and of itself. It can be bad used by the wrong people. And so as individuals, right? And because I will always go back to the individual, right? My trust is always in the individual, never in cultures, communities, or movements, or any of that. Because what we need to understand is once a movement's happened, it's not even the individuals thinking anymore. It's just the leader thinking for them and telling them what to think. So understanding how persuasion works is important to understanding, to making sure you don't get roped into something and are ultimately not being persuaded in a negative way, right? And as long as you can understand how persuasion works, you're going to be more equipped to see it when it's happening, to step back from it, and ultimately critically think for yourself, because that's the most important thing that we can do as individuals. So thank you for taking the time to be here today and to be here on this episode. And for those of you that found this helpful, we have more helpful resources over at restoredminds.com, and there's some links down below. And we also would really appreciate if you would like, subscribe, share, hit the notification buttons, because again, we just really want to get our messages out to people to help them, especially these times where there's a lot of negative persuasion going on. And so, thank you so much. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day.